Very good. How are you?
Yeah, awesome as well. I'm really excited to talk about this topic, one that's increasingly showing its face across not just property investing, but across society as a whole. I notice that more and more people are starting to use AI, talk about AI. We use AI on a daily basis, and it's been around for a lot longer than people think. But
Yeah.
we are certainly starting to see now the common integration with AI through everything that we do, and there's more and more chat about it wherever you look, wherever you turn. And so, we wanted to kind of just have a conversation around what we see are increasing use of AI within property investing. And in some occasions, maybe more the negative sides of that, the over-reliance on it. So, yeah, what's your thoughts on that at a high level?
Yeah, I think look, the advent of AI and the introduction of it, absolutely, you can see where the value sits from that. Are we seeing perhaps an over-reliance on some of this? We'll go into the detail of it, but 100% we're seeing more and more responses that are clearly being generated by AI rather than the client themselves. They can, I think, used correctly as a tool, then undoubtedly it can accelerate learning, it can help overcome obstacles and various different matters along like that. So it has its place. I guess the topic of conversation today is where is its place? As we see it as of today, obviously it will evolve over time as well, and I'm sure this episode will get outdated quite quickly, I'm sure. But yeah, it's just interesting to see where it sits, how it's going to help people, and also where we can see some of the potential pitfalls based on our experience of clients using it to date.
Yeah, 100%. And I think just kind of in order to understand a little bit about what we see in terms of, where the market is going with it, and, you know, is AI helping investors, or actually, and helping them make better decisions, or is it sort of masking things a little bit, masking some gaps in knowledge, leading to some maybe overconfidence and leading people down the wrong path, and maybe making it things a little bit more risky for them than what would be if they weren't relying on it so much. So we've got a few key topics that we want to kind of some topics that we've covered off. So the first one being how AI is being used in the investor space right now. So what are you seeing that people are using it for at the moment?
So we're seeing a bit of a theme, I guess, around AI and its use. Now, there are dedicated tech solutions which integrate AI and so on and so forth. And we're not talking about those necessarily. You'd like to think, been well thought out. AI has been adopted because it enhances the solution they've already built and so on and so forth. I guess we're talking really around those investors that are perhaps plugging certain things into models like ChatGPT, asking that questions and then firing that off to us. Perhaps that's helping them do deal analysis, for example, and things like that. Perhaps that's doing some risk modeling for them. Again, there's a whole host. The thing that I can see with AI, with things like ChatGPT, which is the better known model that's out there, is that it can enable you to go down a rabbit hole very quickly, in that you can get answers to questions in an instant, and then that spurs another question and so on and so forth, and you've gone so deep down a rabbit hole that you kind of missed the point and you can go off an agenda. The other thing I think that's that people need to be aware of is AI can be wrong in instances. We know that it can be wrong. So it's fundamentally important that you understand what it's telling you rather than just taking it as true and running along with it and trying to put offers on property or answer questions that we may ask, for example. The best users that I see are the ones that understand the topic and use AI to enhance or accelerate conversations, decision making, and that sort of thing, but still fundamentally have the base knowledge in order to use it. So, yeah, that's kind of where I see it fitting in. We do definitely see an over reliance of it, but it does stand out as well. It's pretty
Yeah.
evident when somebody is using AI to answer questions they don't understand because the context is wrong. And also, they've just copied and pasted it out of ChatGPT, so it's still got the icons and the dashes and everything else that comes with it. So yeah, that's what we're seeing.
You can see a ChatGPT email a mile off, can't you? You know, and some people are very brazen; they don't even bother changing any of it. Some will change it, but you can still see it running through the themes. So it is very evident, and so yeah, we're seeing it just in communication, aren't we? Without looking at the, you know, so that's at a very high level. Then you're looking at your deal analysis and knowledge, and I think probably knowledge is the one that, which is, you know, effectively people used to Google things. Now they're putting it into chat, and actually the first response that Google throws back at you now is in AI before you even, you know, response before you even get into links and things like that. So that's developing at a rate of knots as well. And you know, I guess they're trying to do is, so you've got deal analysis, you've got knowledge, and that knowledge comes in various guises, what's happening in the market. Also, you're seeing probably a lot of being used for content, because you can see a lot of newer people in the industry throwing out all sorts of content, and you know, is that aligned or not? Is it thought through or whatever? So yeah, it's interesting to see where it's being used, and I think ultimately the key function is that you can use it to give, you know, to gain some high level experience or high level knowledge and give some confidence, but not actually using it from a competence perspective.
Yeah, and I think you know, learning how to prompt AI in the first instance is a skill in itself. So you know, there's that old adage, isn't it? Rubbish in, rubbish out type thing. You put rubbish into the chat, then you'll get rubbish back out, or it can be confidently wrong. So it may sound like it's know what it's talking about, but if you don't understand what it's talking about and it doesn't understand what it's talking about, then there's surely a recipe for disaster. So understanding how you set the parameters, the guardrails, and how you have that conversation to make sure it doesn't go off, it doesn't hallucinate, as they say, and start making stuff up, is super important. So an example that I've seen where it was evident that I thought was getting on the realms of dangerous was where we asked for a schedule of works off a client to explain to us what they're going to do with the property, how much their budget's going to be, and so on. And they clearly had just gone into ChatGPT and asked it to give me a schedule of works for this property. And I was like, well, this hasn't done the walk around and so on. And you're trying to run a budget to evidence to the lender that you understand, you know what you're talking about. It may well have slipped through the net, and because it looked authentic, but there's an example of where just spitting out words versus what actually is required can end up in a very different place when you get in there, and that's clearly going to jeopardize the project as a whole, despite being able to get your hands on the money.
Yeah, 100%. So on to the next point then, where are investors becoming over-reliant on it? And I think we've touched a little bit on that already, but what do you see in the over-reliance?
Yeah, I think, as you say, we've touched upon it, this gap in knowledge, whereas people would have to either do it through lived experience, you know, have the battle scars of making mistakes along the way, speaking to other experienced individuals, speaking to other professionals. I think people see this as a way to avoid perhaps spending money in places or time in places that you need to spend in order to see how it actually works. You know, there are plenty of property books, there's YouTube resources and so on. We all know that those are great resources, but you know, the life happens quite different to that has been depicted in that particular set of circumstances. So that's where I think we're starting to see this over-reliance coming in it. And as I say, it is quite evident in some of the responses that we get, and how deals are presented to us, that they have been presented to us via ChatGPT. I do tend to call it out. And the only reason for that is to go, has this been put together by ChatGPT? Because it's incumbent on us to make sure you understand, you know what you're doing, especially if we're the ones trying to get you the money and try and convince the lender that you know what you're doing.
I think one of the, so the key part of that is people are taking AI as fact, rather than some pointers to discuss. and just taking everything that they read as the gospel, and obviously we shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, ways in which I think people can use it wise is, so for example, do your deal analysis yourself, put it into your spreadsheet, build your spreadsheet and so on, and then give that deal analysis to AI and ask that to pull it apart and critique it and show gaps in your knowledge that you can take away and go, well, actually, I don't understand what that metric is, because it'll probably spit something back at you that you may not have heard of as far as ROI, I use an example, but it may spit something back at you. Then you take that away and go, right, what does that actually mean? Is that important to me? And so on. So you've started and done the legwork yourself, but you're asking AI to enhance it rather than create it in the first instance.
Yeah, 100%. I also think that there's an over-reliance in terms of the technical details. So things such as legal and planning. You know, if you look at HMOs and planning requirements, for instance, you know, we speak to a planning consultant pretty regularly, and he'll often joke that people say they've had advice from their friend. Say, okay, cool, who's your friend? Google. And it's just obviously completely wrong. And this is just an advancement of that, really, isn't it? If you're asking AI for planning, yes, it might be able to go and search, you know, and do some deep research even on various aspects of the planning. They won't know the necessarily to the enough detail of something that's happened within the last 6 months, maybe, because documents haven't been up, council don't update the documents, things happen on a more granular level locally quite quickly. You know, I know there's been some halts in some parts of the country because of nitrate levels in the water, for instance. You know, is AI going to know that? You know, some planning departments are fully on stop until the nitrates are sorted. You know, these are massive. And if you go and buy a property on the basis you're going to get planning on it and haven't picked up nitrates as an issue, for instance, all of a sudden, you know, you've just potentially wasted a huge amount of money that you're not going to get back. So, you know, and then obviously legal, you know, the laws are quite in depth, but it's just going to be more black and white to here's the law, rather than, well, how do you interpret that law, and what are, you know, what can and can't you do around it, and, you know. So yeah, you're not going to get proper advice, are you? And that's where professionals come into it and can give you that advice.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that AI can't be used to review legal documents. However, you know, so I've used it in the past where something has been 50 odd pages long, and I've effectively asked it to surmise and give me an overview of the document. Now, I'm not leaning on that document to ultimately make a decision. I just want it to shortcut the process. Rather than me read 50 odd pages of a legal document, there's certain bits I want to know from that document, so I fired questions at it to say, right, has it got this, has it got that? Yes, can you show me? And then I also ask it to source and refer me back to the exact paragraph that it's getting that answer from, so I can then revert back to the document to read it for myself and go, well, okay, that's where it's covered. So that's where AI can shortcut the process on a legal document rather than actually try to write my full AST or my lease purchase option arrangement agreement on there as well. So it can be used, but this is where we talk about over-reliance versus kind of just speed up something that I would have had to have done anyway.
Yeah, one of the sayings, and I remember, you know, hearing this for the first time a number of years ago, and it's so true. You don't know what you don't know, and so until you learn that, and this is taking what we're going back to, you know, if AI is wrong, you won't know it's wrong necessarily, and so you'll just take that for fact. And so you have to do more research to make sure that the answers are, you know, what you're being told is correct.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and it's and that's the point, isn't it? Is that people just assume that it's right, you know. And I speak to lots of people who use it, and I would argue if you're not using it, you're probably falling behind the curve. So we're not saying that not to use AI. Actually, you should be using it, but you should be using it in the right way, and not just thinking that that's going to provide all of the answers. You don't need the professionals anymore, and you can bulldoze your way through a process. Whilst the process is frustrating, it is there to protect all parties. And if you embrace that and use AI to accelerate the process rather than be the process, I think that's where it fits well.
Yeah. So before we moved on to, you know, some of those where AI does add value, just what are some of the sort of real risks of an over reliance on on it. I think I just mentioned one really around, you know, if you take planning as an example, you might buy a property on the basis you've had some planning advice from it, and then find out that you can't get planning, and you've left with a property that you can't do what you intended to, and have paid over the odds for it on the basis that you can do some sort of planning gain, and not getting that. So that's one example. Do you have any others?
Yeah, if you try and source lenders through it, so you can ask it to go and do some market research and find you the best lenders for X, Y, and Z. There are so many nuances within lender criteria. For example, we've done episodes on this in the past. The valuation of the property, is that going to be open market value, the 180-day value, 90-day value? If you want to understand what that means, check out some previous episodes. You've gone into that in depth. What are you valuing? So you could easily just jump on something that looks attractive in it because it'll present you a table of all the findings, and you'll dive into that. So you can easily go down the wrong path off the back of that. Is one area that I think is dangerous. And also trying to make it make financial decisions for you. So when you're taking a future look at to how you want to achieve what you want to achieve, and have it do your financial forecasting, as I say, it shouldn't be the tool that does, it should be the tool that enhances. You need to have the fundamental knowledge as to what that looks like going forward.
Yeah. One, just to echo a point that you brought up just now, was around pricing a refurb potentially as well. I think, you know, if it goes away and takes, you know, the average build costs, you know, across RICS, or what RICS has had, you know, one thing we've talked a lot about is on the development side is the increase in inflationary pressures on both materials and labour, and those prices have skyrocketed over the last couple of years. So if you ask it to price a refurb for you off the back of, you know, data that it has, depending on how up to date that data is, it could be way off the mark again. So, you know, if you're shortcutting that rather than speaking to a QS or a builder and getting a proper up to date quote, you could be massively off the mark. You know, I was talking to a decent sized property developer this morning, and he was just, you know, we were chewing the fat around how much things have gone up, and it's wild what he's able, you know, the cost on it to create a 1-bed flat, for instance, now is just absolutely bonkers. But you know, that's the way the market is. There's not much you can do about that, unfortunately. You know, that's what it takes to build it. That's what it takes to build it. The decision is, do you build it or not? Is it worth your while? So yeah, that was an interesting conversation, and just shows the point.
Yeah, and the other one is, so if we take it then to the comparable side of things, is, you know, you could effectively ask AI to do the research on your comparables. Again, as we know, there are nuances within the comparables, so not all 2-bed semi-detached houses are the same. 3 streets away might be different to this one, and there are reasons why one's priced 30,000 more than the other. Land, all of that sort of stuff. So it can pull in the data, but it won't necessarily have the local knowledge and the insight that you would if you were an investor looking at what are the dynamics going on. If you spoke to an agent, you'd probably get a very different answer. Yes, they can pull in the data. Absolutely, they've got access to the same data the AI has got. However, the estate agent will have a lot more knowledge as to the local area and what appetite is and so on versus the other side. So whilst if you went through the route of bridging, or development finance, you'll have a valuer that will come and hopefully catch that as part of the process. But that's a £3,000-4,000 expense, and time, and negotiation with the buyer, and all of that stuff that's got to go into getting you to that stage in the first instance, just because you didn't have a basic or a fundamental understanding as to the market and what figures you're actually using. Yeah.
Another one that's just I thought of as well is, if you look at the property laws, for instance, you know, so if you're managing landlord, if you're a landlord managing properties in England, in Wales, or in Scotland, there's 3 separate rules. So you just need to make sure that, and again, this is the questions, the prompts that you put into it. But if you just ask for generic advice, you might get advice back based on England, and that might not, and you might act on that, and it not be very relevant at all for, in fact, totally irrelevant and not related to the regulations that your property's need to comply with. So yeah, 100%. There's lots of different things. So I think, you know, on the basis of what we've said, you know, just tread with caution, make sure that you aren't over relying on it. Use it for guidance. Use it to sound out ideas and strategy and get some feedback, but just don't take it for gospel. I think that's and still seek professional advice. So if we just drop onto then some of the more positives then, where does AI sit in terms of adding value? Where are the real value adds that people can use? And probably we've touched on some of them already, but anything that jumps out to you?
Yeah, definitely. So I think whilst people can use it to cover skills gaps or knowledge gaps, you can also use it to understand where you've got gaps in your knowledge. So what you could in theory do would be something along the lines of, I'm thinking of X, Y, and Z, you know, what are the steps I need to take? So it will spit out, you know, the steps along the way. You might go, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that, or I wouldn't have thought of that. It's quite useful for that sort of stuff. So then you could take that away, whether you want to dig deeper into that within the AI, or whether you want to then go, well, actually, I need to go away and take this information and go and learn and go to more official sources to get that information. I think that's where it can be particularly useful. Again, it just moves you through that process a lot faster. Whereas if you didn't have something like an AI, you probably would have to learn that through lived experience, which, as we know, can be painful, can be expensive. So things like that, I do think it can be particularly useful as well, just identifying where you probably have got gaps in that knowledge.
I 100%. I think that's where it adds value the most, where you can have like a conversation with it, like as a coach or a mentor or something like that, and saying, I'm like you said, I'm thinking of doing this. What do I need to consider? And that'll just give you a starting point, and then you can, you know, to go away. And so it's not actually giving you it's not the technical and detail that you need. It's the high level things that you need to think about and go away and do some more research on and consider. So yeah, definitely helping people get up to grips with things quicker and in a more seamless way than trying to Google things and go various things. But there's so much content out there on various aspects, various, you know, courses, YouTube, podcasts, books. You know, this, you know, depends how people learn, isn't it? You know, and that's part of why we are doing this, is to try and help educate people in a different way. Just sharing our experience that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis now.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things that one of the benefits that we have talked about is communication. You know, some people don't have great written English, don't have great communication skills and things. So this is where it can add value, because even though you can see an AI email coming through, you'd probably rather see an AI email coming through. You know, as long as it's get the point across, than maybe something that they could have come up with themselves. So, you know, you have to look at it with, you know, from both sides of the equation, don't you? You know, and being able to get that point across, but you can see through some of them on the basis that it's pulling information that isn't relevant, and that's the problem, isn't it? It's just not using that in the right way. And I think there are also now probably automations that can happen, which is making a landlord's journey, especially from a landlord's perspective, in terms of managing properties. There's lots of systems and software out there now which you can bring automations in, be that finance, be that managing your tenancies. Obviously, we've talked about PinTech a lot, well, not a lot, but we've talked about PinTech and on that can do for you in terms of managing your portfolio. It just reduces the changes that have come in from the government to professionalise landlords and the landlord sector and the private rental sector. These tools are here to help you, not make sure you don't miss deadlines, make sure you tick off everything that you needed to tick off to make sure you are compliant. So, you know, use those tools, isn't it? That find the thing that works for you to support you and ultimately make your life easier, so that you're not getting caught up in all the compliance headaches and not missing things and then therefore becoming non-compliant.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the point there is that it sits on top of an existing process. So if you know that you want to put it in at point A and it goes through B, C, D, and E and then comes out at F, then, and you know that it's the same every time it happens. So let's say a tenant reaches out because there's a problem with the property. There will be a series of questions that you will naturally just ask, you know, is the water coming through the ceiling or whatever that may be. Then by doing that, the same question, so you can automate that because it will go through exactly the same process when the next person rings with this with the same thing, and it'll, you know, it's a decision tree effectively. So that you can theoretically automate to a point so that you can filter out whether something's urgent or not, and so on, whether that's an out of hours call or otherwise. What you can't do then is plug it into AI and say, well, how do I fix the boiler? Do you know that's taking it to a level that's beyond what it's meant to do. So where you've got that, as I say, automations can severely reduce the amount of time that you spend doing repetitive tasks, which is where I think AI comes into its own in this space.
Yeah, so I think if you take that example, if you had a tenant who rang up and say, you know, my I've got a leak, you know, what do you need? So you could put that into AI and go, right, you know, what do I need to consider here, and it'll give you those, but it won't tell you whether you need to send out. It won't make the decision that if the boiler needs to be changed or not. For instance, it will just, you know, there's a leak in the boiler, right? Get the plumber out. It'll be the plumber that will make that decision, not the AI, because it won't know the reality. So I think it's you know, the key sentiment is that it's a great assistant to help come up with ideas to the problem, but it's not a decision maker, at least not yet.
Not yet, and that's why I said this episode could go out of date quite quickly if ChatGPT released another model and rubbishes everything we've just said. So
absolutely. So let's finish up then on why do you think. Why is, you know, we've talked about some of the pros and cons. Why is it that human experience and expertise is still, you know, incredibly important to the process?
I think there's a few different things. So depending on which angle you're coming at it from, whether you be an investor who's doing a development or whether you're a landlord dealing with tenants and so on, I think there. So if we're looking at it as, are you using it to interact with other individuals? Well, there are people at the end of this process. So people are humans, they have emotions, they have personalities and all of that sort of stuff. So an AI, as good as it can be, you know, that interaction and that relationship piece, you're probably going to remove yourself from that process. And, you know, a lot of tenants, arguably the stronger the relationship, the better that the longevity of that stay will be. In regards to the bigger, more investment-led decision-making and so on, having your own personal base knowledge of the fundamentals has to be relevant and pertinent. Otherwise, you're not going to know. And we go back to, you don't know what you don't know. You won't understand whether what it's telling you is absolute garbage or whether it's actually just brought up something that's material that you hadn't have thought of that could turn what is a deal that looks fantastic into a deal that you could be walking into an absolute nightmare of a scenario. So that base knowledge for me has to be there. Otherwise, you run the risk, as I say, of it making decisions for you rather than you using it to help you make better decisions.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the other key one is around, you know, we're talking about humans and property involves relationships, be that tenant, landlord, developer, builder, end user, you know, broker, client, planning authorities. You know, there's so many different relationships, estate agents, letting agents, and if you just rely on AI, they're not going to understand, you know, the individual that you're dealing with, your experience with that individual, and how to, you know, you manage that relationship. And yeah, like you said, it's there's emotions involved, isn't there? It's not, you know, sometimes, and especially if it's, you know, someone who has a leak 2 days before Christmas, and there's all sorts going on, and how that's going to affect, your outcome, and there's just having to take that emotional aspect of human relationships, which obviously is not there yet on that either.
No, but I am a massive advocate of AI. I think used in the right manner, it can materially change how you do things, and it can give you back the time that that's how finite resource. That's the bit that you can't necessarily put a price tag on. I think it can give you back time that enables you to spend on other things that are potentially more valuable to you. And we look to adopt AI where we can. I think the challenge for us is understanding when is it useful and when is it a gimmick. Because AI, if you only have to look at online now and everything's got AI built into it and so on and so forth. Does that actually add value to your process, or is it just a gimmick, just to tick the AI box? And that's really, I think, the acid test for whether AI works for you or not. Does it actually produce actionable outputs, or is it literally just the fact that you can say I use AI in my business, and it's more of an ego thing and a gimmick thing? That's where it sits for me.
Yeah, and I think one of the other ones that probably is super important is where you've got sort of professional networks, so that can unlock different opportunities. I think we have, I know when I'm on a phone to a client or somebody, during that conversation, if we're talking about the deal structure, or we're talking about what can and can't be done, or the next steps, or various things that they need to go away and research or look at, that almost inevitably every time involves me making some sort of recommendation that they need to speak to somebody else before we can move on with our process. Be that a solicitor, an accountant, a planner, or whatever it may be. Outside of that, there's so many moving parts to the bigger jigsaw and the bigger the puzzle that, we know the people that we can guide you in that right direction. So you're not going to get that kind of personal relationship and network that can come from that. So it's still got a long way to go. I think it's a great addition to what we're already doing, and can help speed up the process in many different ways. But I'm certainly not concerned anytime soon that the world's going to end and AI is going to take over. But must remember to always say please and thank you, just in case it does.
Yeah, indeed. And remember, if it is anything like Armageddon, you don't have to be you don't have to outrun the robot. You just have to outrun the person who's in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it tickled me the other day when say manners are free. I remember my wife was saying to my boy the other day, "Don't forget, manners are free." And then I'd heard that ChatGPT is spending hundreds of millions in extra pounds each year, or dollars, whatever it is, just because of the people being polite. All the extra energy that it takes in all of that. So that's quite interesting. So look, great conversation. Is there anything you'd like to add at this point? I think we've covered the things that we sought to cover, and just kind of recap that it's a great tool, but don't over rely on it. And there's definitely some care and attention that needs to be taken when you are using it, and absolutely use it, but just be careful and mindful about who's on the receiving end as well, and actually think through how you're using it.
Yeah, AI is here to stay. Adoption is if you haven't already, then certainly just take baby steps just to get familiar with it, and get it to do low value, low consequence tasks, or questions and that sort of thing. I think you should be adopting it. If you don't, you're going to get left behind in the next 5 to 10 years easily, especially as it gets more and more sophisticated. You don't want to be learning it when it's hyper sophisticated. Learn it now where it's still quite straightforward to learn, because it'll be like children brought up on iPhones and tablets. They don't even think about how they use it, whereas the likes of me, who was brought up on a Nokia 6610, it takes a little while. So trying to learn a new skill when it's that advanced, you probably want to get on that train now, I suspect, even if you don't fully adopt it, just understand what its power is, and I think then you'll be in a good place.
Brilliant. Great conversation. Thanks, Mark. Good to catch up, and we'll catch up again soon.
Yep. Speak to you soon. Take care.